Welcome to the Art of Neurodivergence, brought to you by Neurodivergent Ohio. We are your hosts for today's episode. My name is Sammi. I am an LISW with she, her pronouns.
And my name is Heather, and I am an LPCC-S with she, her pronouns. The information provided is intended for informational and entertainment purposes. It does not act as a substitute for the diagnosis and treatment of mental health concerns.
And as just a precursor for today's episode, as an example for some really good practices for neurodivergent people to do when it comes to doing something hard or detailed or important, we're going to describe where we're coming from today mentally, physically, emotionally, and we're going to see where we get with that. I am a little bit anxious since this is our first podcast, a little bit restless, but excited and ready to go and feeling good and peaceful and mostly ready. Heather, what about you?
Also feeling pretty anxious, Sammi. This is the first time, and for neurodivergent folks, that tends to be how things go like this. So feeling anxious, but also feeling very excited to be here with you and to kind of talk with our audience, give them some information on who we are and a little bit about neurodivergence.
Well, perfect. I love to hear that. And the first thing we're going to do is tell you a little bit about what neurodivergence is. That is the big question we're dealing with today and where we want to start our podcast off on, because that's what's going to help carry us forward into the specifics, into the community building. We want to get a really good understanding of what exactly it is we're talking about. So, first off, basic description of neurodiversity or neurodivergence, both words used pretty interchangeably, I would say. Some people have a little bit different takes on that, but for us, we're mostly going to be using neurodivergence. It's a framework for understanding the human brain function, and it considers the diversity within sensory processing, motor abilities, social comfort, cognition, and attention and focus, and all of those as neurobiological differences. And it's a big spectrum, obviously. It's a big umbrella. And if you look it up, if you Google it, a lot of the times you're going to see an image of an umbrella with a bunch of different items in it. And the two that, well, I guess not really two, but a few that we like to primarily focus on, and I think what relates most to our culture and our relative understanding of the people with brains like ours, is ADHD, autism, and dyslexia, dyscalculia, some of those learning challenges like that. And like I said, it is a big umbrella. There are a lot of different conditions that fall under neurodiversity. Some even, mental health stuff like PTSD, OCD, BPD, eating disorders, all of that. Some acquired conditions like epilepsy, migraines, traumatic brain injury, dementia, Parkinson's, and lots of other developmental things like tic disorders and even some physical health stuff. It all falls under that spectrum framework of how we think of just processing the world and how our brains work differently. So big umbrella, but again, kind of coming back to what our main focuses are, ADHD and autism primarily, with some inclusion of learning differences and issues, difficulties, whatever you'd like to call them. The first approach we're going to take to that, and I think the first thing we want to center in on to give us a good basis, is discussing where some of the history of neurodivergent conditions came from, and again, more specifically, the ADHD and autism. So we will get into that right now. Now that we have a good idea of what neurodivergence is, it's helpful for us to know where it came from. I think a lot of people struggle with the idea that neurodivergence, ADHD, autism, learning differences are more of a current issue in our modern age. And I think it's super helpful to know that that's not totally true. There are lots of recorded instances of maybe not the exact way we know it today, but these brain differences that we're describing all the way back to the mid to late 1700s, where attention issues were first starting to be seen and recorded by some major physicians in places like Germany, the UK, Australia. and on into the early 1900s, where we started seeing the first recorded investigations of autism, which actually at that time was thought to be a subset of schizophrenia. And then we move into like the 30s, the 40s, onto the 60s is where we started getting a medical, medication based approach to things like ADHD. We started seeing more specific research and treatment of autism, definitely not in the terminology we know it today. But then as those points of research progressed, we got to the point where we were having new and different medications, multiple models of treatment, different diagnostic criteria, like the development of the DSMs, outlining of things like ADHD, things like autism, dyscalculia, dyslexia, and all of those being very specialized when it comes to their diagnostic criteria and their treatment. And now I think with the subsets of ADHD, autism being seen as a spectrum disorder with different types of severity and different levels and different presentations, I think we have a much more diverse and evidence based model to work off of when it comes to all of these things. And as much as with those things, also with what else falls under the big neurodiversity umbrella. So, all of that research has really culminated in a big, detailed understanding of all of those things. And I think now what people like us are trying to do is boil it down into how does that apply to our lives? How does that apply to maybe how we look at that history? And how does it move us forward? I think specifically it's also cool to talk about how neurodiversity or neurodivergence as a term got its start and how it started helping to build some of those communities around this type of different brain having culture. So Judy Singer, a sociologist from Australia, originally, now I don't know if she coined or popularized the term, different sources say different things, but she definitely got it going. And she wrote a thesis on neurodivergence in 1998 with a focus on autistic communities and the need for those individuals to be supported by a community. And she helped to amplify that term to communities that kind of took it and rolled with it. They started, making some community efforts like emailing groups like newsletter type things that helped to promote independent living, promoted new ways of thinking, understanding, advocacy, different skills to use, different ways of life that people could relate to. And, Judy Singer's advocacy really helped to push that along. And it got more allies and advocates involved. Eventually, a contributor named Jim Sinclair, who was an author and an advocate for autism specifically, helped pioneer the neurodivergence movement and started the Autism Network International, which is kind of a bigger effort to advocate for autistic and neurodiverse individuals. He challenged a lot of the ways that we think or were thinking at the time in the 90s is kind of when his work was prevalent about autism and neurodivergence in general as a disorder, as debilitating, as something to grieve or mourn for. A lot of his work was challenging those ideas of no, it is not something that is completely detrimental and horrible for someone to live with. And we need to be advocating and uplifting people in our families, in our communities, and realizing maybe who of our own selves is neurodiverse and promoting a more inclusive world and kind of battling that stigma that we had been dealing with. On a note of history, though, I think another thing that's really cool when it comes to relating to seeing the world through a more educated lens of neurodiversity would be to note that there are a lot of historical figures that people are pretty sure, without throwing any diagnoses around, were probably neurodivergent. And we're talking people like Albert Einstein, intense focus, creativity. Some social difficulties have been noted from him, pretty consistent with the traits of autism. Isaac Newton also showed some traits in his intense concentration, solitary nature, the way he kind of saw the world, very unique. Nikola Tesla, Marie Curie, Benjamin Franklin, so many cool people. Another one that I think I see talked about a lot is Michelangelo. I mean, interesting if he did not have a hyperfixation on his work that he did what he did. Um, and also people like Andy Warhol, very, very consistent with the autism, and some people also say dyslexia in the way that he, did his work. And other people like, let's see, Hans Christian Andersen, famous author, and Charles Darwin also. So I think those are some pretty cool people that have maybe possibly shaped our world that are neurodivergent. So, next, we want to talk a little bit about the current climate and culture when it comes to neurodivergence. So, we know a little bit about the history, a little bit about the, you know, foundations of where this kind of climate and movement came from. And so we're going to go over what it looks like today. And Heather is going to help us out with that. And she's also going to tell us about some people that we can look to as some leaders, some advocates, and some really good examples of neurodivergence in our current climate.
Thanks, Sammy. And I think the big takeaway that you were talking about with, some of those people in history who, have been suspected of having some form of neurodivergence is that the creativity and the successes are astronomical. They are something that I think as a society as a whole, there is a stigma around possibilities, things that can be done, achievements that can be achieved, all of that. And throughout history, we have a number of people who have come out and disclosed that, have been suspected of it, and have still found a way to reach the goals that they've set for themselves. And so, something I always tell my clients is everybody's brain works a little bit differently, and I think that's kind of the sense that we're seeing with, some of this current cultural kind of stuff. I think a lot of what Judy Singer was saying in terms of kind of bringing together the community, looking at neurodivergence as more of um, is that neurodivergence issues are not deficits or disorders. They're more natural variations of the human brain. And there are some people who their brain pathways are like, I'm going to take the highway, I'm going to get there the fastest way, and I'm going to be successful. And there are some people who just need to take the back roads. And sometimes the back roads are beautiful. You see things that you don't
Love that.
necessarily get to see. Yeah, when you're taking that fast route. And so no matter what kind of way your brain works, I think there's wonderful things to be said on both ends for those who are neurotypical and neurodivergent. So,
Yeah. And if I could
um,
say a little bit about something
yeah,
um, that relates to all that history stuff and the figures that we brought up is that those were not people dealing with ADHD and autism diagnoses in the way that we are today. Think
absolutely.
about the limitations that they could have experienced in their foundational work to the human experience if they had
Mhm.
people telling them that they were limited by their brain functions and the way that they worked, and how much less we would know and have and be able to appreciate if those people experienced some of the barriers we have today, as far as people telling us we can't, people making us feel less than, neurodivergent people being limited by labels or, kind of this ceiling of ability that we have sometimes. And I think it's kind of cool to think about they didn't have that, but they did have the traits. They were probably
Mhm.
limited in a lot and challenged in a lot of the ways that we were, but they did these amazing things. And so I think it is cool to take that as perspective in how we treat and think about neurodivergence today. And that's a little bit more about what you're going to talk about. So you can go ahead with that.
Yeah. So the term neurodivergence, yes, it's a huge umbrella term, but as we've moved through history, I think it's become more of an anti-ableist term where it talks more about like the supports and strengths of the community while providing necessary empowerment and resource support. It emphasizes neurological differences as being, a primary area of focus. But like I said, natural variations of the human brain rather than something to be seen as something lacking. We do tend to see a lot of folks with neurodivergence have sensory issues, specifically ADHD, autism. there is a high correlation between autism and dyslexia. I know the National Institute of Health says anywhere from 25 to 40% of individuals who have one of those diagnoses will typically see that there's the other one that coexists. Schools, workplaces, the creation of sensory inclusive spaces and events have been more normalized over the past several years and embraced by the neurodivergent community. When this gets into schools, work accommodations, things like IEPs are something that's accepted and noticed by the public schools. So, if you have a student that's struggling or a minor, if you are struggling with something at work, typically some form of disability, IEP, anything like that can request, special accommodations. We tend to see things like longer time on tests, somewhere that's more quiet, more breaks. All of those can be very beneficial for individuals who fall on that neurodivergent spectrum. However, not many individuals get a diagnosis because of the stigma that surrounds it, or kind of what we talked about, where back in the day, they didn't know the things that we know now. And so there's a lot of older people, specifically adults, who have just either been misdiagnosed or haven't been diagnosed at all because they just didn't have those resources, didn't have that information in the past. So,
And on the note of people not being diagnosed in older generations, I think as a descriptor of the climate and culture of neurodivergence right now, I do think we see it being a lot more younger people. Gen Z and millennials, I think, participate most of all in that culture of community of neurodivergence. Like, I think what comes to mind most for people right now is social media. That's the biggest part of our culture
absolutely.
right now. And that's, I think, where a lot of us younger people are learning. Me, younger, I'm 30. You know, younger people learning a lot about neurodivergence. And I think even people in their 30s are learning a lot from social media and making sure that we keep that evidence-based research supported is always really important to us. So noting that we're not going to we have to work with that culture basically rather than be too cautious of it or decide not to join it. And I think that is coming up here in our description of the work that we do as professionals, something that is really important to us and integral to our approach. But Heather, I know you got a little more to say about current neurodivergent culture.
Yeah, and you hit the nail right on the head there with talking about social media and things like that. I mean, come on, how many of us have been guilty of being on TikTok and seeing somebody that has ADHD or autism or is convinced the end of the world is, going to happen, and there's not a little part of you that dives down that rabbit hole, and then you
Totally.
just kind of convinced that you have 14 different diagnoses, and
So
so
true.
um
That algorithm really
yeah,
gets you.
it really does, and then, the algorithm doesn't help, so but yeah,
It doesn't
so,
treat or diagnose,
I
so that's for sure.
this is very true, exactly. It doesn't treat, it doesn't diagnose, and while a lot of stuff on social media is helpful and validating for a lot of people, it's one person's experience. And I think that is something that is huge to keep in mind is while it might feel that way, everybody's different. Like we talked about, everybody's brain works differently, and what's going to work for some people doesn't work for others or is going to manifest differently in each individual. So I know, there's famous people out there. Mark Ruffalo, he's somebody that has been open about his ADHD diagnosis. He's also confirmed that he's got dyslexia. Take Justin Timberlake, Emma Watson, Simone Biles. They're also, individuals who struggle with neurodivergence and again, still find ways to achieve those goals, even if it takes them a little bit longer. They've got to use different techniques. Still out there doing the work.
Another really cool one that I like to know is Greta Thunberg. I believe that's the way you pronounce that. Great advocate
Yeah.
for climate change, for human rights. Very cool work she's been doing recently. And she is really going at it with her advocacy. And I mean, the limitations that you might expect someone with neurodivergence to have, it's like amazing what she does to advocate for people and, to always keep taking the focus off herself and onto marginalized and oppressed populations, and it's really cool. All of
Yeah.
the groundwork and all of the absolutely strenuous physical stuff she does to advocate for people. Another really cool one, not essentially a celebrity we would know of today, but a woman by the name of Temple Grandin was really integral in a lot of the autism advocacy and work and understanding in the just kind of current world as we know it today. She did a lot of work with livestock. There's actually a popular movie made about her. A very good movie, would recommend. And yeah, so like that's a couple of the people to note that have neurodivergence and have kind of spoken out about it, have promoted what it looks like to be a successful, influential person with neurodivergence. And I mean, along with those, there's literally people all around us. It is so, so prevalent to be neurodivergent. And I think that's why
Mhm.
this community building is so awesome because it feels like it starts off kind of small, but you start to realize how big this community is and how much you are absolutely not alone in the things that you go through as a neurodivergent person. So just, I mean, obviously your neighbor, your friend, your family, they're probably also neurodivergent too if you are. And it's cool to know that the people you watch on TV, the people you read about in books, they're also neurodivergent too. So very
Mhm.
cool to kind
Absolutely.
of know that as a cultural note. And then the next thing we talk a little bit about now that we have this understanding of what it used to look like, what it looks like now, is what we do as professionals, why we're doing this podcast, who we are. So we are part of an organization called Neurodivergent Ohio, as we said before, or NDO. That's probably how we will refer to ourselves. We are an Ohio-based mental health agency focusing on assessments and counseling for individuals with autism and ADHD. And we're looking to even expand that into more of those conditions that fall into that neurodivergent umbrella. Those are our focuses currently. And Heather's going to tell us a little more about the assessment part of that.
Yeah. So we offer assessments for ADHD and autism, like Sammy said. Right now, we are only seeing adult autism clients. That is due to the area that we seen that needed the most. So yeah, with the autism and ADHD assessments, we do those for adults. We also do it for those 6 and older for ADHD. For autism specifically, though, we are aiming towards the adult population, and that's specifically because we see that that is an area that is not given the largest amount of resources, and while over time the boom in autism cases has increased for children. I know specifically at our local hospital, Nationwide Children's, they have anywhere from a 6 to 9 month wait list. They have a lot of people, just kind of waiting to see, what the outcome is going to be. And when we think about of our adults and that population who maybe was experienced symptoms for, couple of years when they were younger. So yeah, we do ADHD and autism testing. So the ADHD, we have 2 sections for that. We have a shorter version, which is a couple of questionnaires. You fill those out, you get those back to me, and we go over what those results are. Talk about some interventions, how it might, apply to you, and what your ongoing treatment plan is. We'll give you the diagnosis if it's there, and we will kind of work with you on an ongoing plan to kind of help you receive treatment. So that's our shorter version, and that typically is 2 sessions. So then the 4 section part of the ADHD assessment is you'll still get those same forms that you get during the 2 session one. However, we're going to do a couple of extra assessments. So, we're looking at other assessments that are going to mask or exacerbate attention issues. There are certain patterns that we're looking for. And we're also going to do a computerized ADHD assessment that really tailors in on what are your biggest distractions, visual, auditory, how do you perform under pressure, how you do on boring tasks for long periods of time, all of those. And so essentially, you're going to get more of a detailed report of what's kind of going on, what your strengths are, um, and some of those areas where, hey, I feel like I'm struggling in these areas. What can I do? We'll work together to find some things that can help with that and allow you to feel validated, but also feel like you understand how your brain is working and where you can go from here to be successful. That will involve a report along with an accommodation letter or a letter to a school if you need something for accommodations. Like I said, more time on test is a big one. If you need something for accommodations, we can do that as well. And then we'll talk about your ongoing plan. We'll send these off to your doctor. Some people prefer to link up with medication, and some people are saying, hey, like, medication's not for me, and that's totally okay. We have members on our staff that can work with you if counseling is something you're interested in, uh, to kind of work with you and help some of those areas.
Yeah, and that is where I come in. I am the ADHD focused counselor. And I don't know if Heather noted before, but she is our main assessor, and she is also training me to be an assessor. So it's a really cool process that involves some really neat tools that are all very evidence based and in line with current research. We pull from a lot of different sources. We've developed this process ourselves, and through a lot of trial and error, through a lot of collaboration with other organizations. We are not following necessarily some super standardized, 1, 2, 3 type test, or, fill out a paper form and we give you a diagnosis. We are super detailed, super interested in how your brain works. And like Heather said, with that report, you get a really cool rundown of like, okay, we measured your auditory memory versus your visual memory. And that might mean that you are more of a, auditory learner. So you like to listen to things. So that means maybe if you're in college, you record your lectures and you can kind of like listen back to them to really retain it in your brain, kind of stuff like that. Life tips for where you're at, what you're struggling with. And the cool thing about getting assessment and counseling from us is we can work together to figure out what those specific challenges are and work that into kind of the model that we'll use to counsel you with, So also with that, we don't really have a specific structure for that, but we take from those specifics of what your assessment is. If you didn't get an assessment with us, we do kind of a precursory assessment when we do an intake for counseling. And it's a process where we really try and individualize it. And we know that there are so many traits and experiences we all share, but also that the neurodivergent experience is so different for all of us. So
So
what
different.
I counsel you on, what I suggest to you, what we work together on, what we track and monitor is going to be different for everybody, but the tools are all kind of based in the same elements of regulation and learning how to be more conscientious, learning how to manage your time better, learning how to self monitor, think ahead, plan for the future, all of that good stuff. And another exciting thing that we noted is our autism area of expertise and services. So, Heather's going to tell us a little more about the autism assessments.
Yeah, so the autism assessments are a long time coming. It's something we have had a number of people that we are currently seeing request. And so being able to provide that for our current clients, but also the clients that we are hoping to reach throughout Ohio. And this will be active starting November 1st and can be done remotely. Everything that we do is remote to you. So if you are, 2.5 hours away, it's not a big deal. We can make it work for you. I guess that is one good thing that has happened from COVID. With the autism assessment, we're looking at 4 or 5 sessions. The first two are going to involve the client and typically a parent, guardian, long term spouse. We're really looking at getting developmental history. We're looking at your background. We're looking at the medical side of things and trying to get a good picture of what things were like for you when you were younger. We're also looking at how things are impacting you today. And so that's why we usually use somebody who knows somebody for a very long time. During that first session, we will both meet And the three of us will kind of just use that time to discuss that background. Might spill over into the second session and it might not. But if not, second section is typically going to be a continuation of that history, but also I want to observe kind of how you are in day-to-day life. And so I would ask the client and their third party to do an activity together. This is giving me some insight. I'm seeing how language is. I'm seeing behaviors that maybe would be a little different than if I was just observing the client one on one, which is what session three is. So, session three is going to be one on one with the client. We'll do a couple of assessments ourselves, but also it's going to give me the opportunity to get to know the client, to also do an activity with them, and kind of get to see some things in variation of the language skills, the differences in a safe person versus a stranger, all of those kind of things. Fourth session is the one that's as needed. This is one that is dependent upon individual need and if there's a possibility that there might be something else at play other than autism. So we'll use that one to rule out or confirm any other diagnoses. And then we have the fifth session, which is the report. And that's when the client and I will meet. If applicable, we'll have that third party sit in. It kind of depends on circumstances. And we'll discuss kind of what this all means. We'll talk resources. We'll talk what they're looking for, things they can do at home, really just trying to tailor it, just like the ADHD assessments, to the client itself, the things that they need, where they want to go, and what they would like to see for their future.
And a lot of that report, I'm sure, involves some, measures of the anxiety someone feels from things like masking or the social difficulties they have with, communication styles and picking up on cues, the difficult or the unique and different problem solving challenges or abilities that they have, things like that, that can lead us to some specific tools that they'll be able to use to their benefit, specifically with how their brain works. And it kind of also lends into the autism counseling that we are going to be offering soon. I am currently working on getting further trained and certified. And so that is not set to start just yet, but soon after we have those assessments up and running, we will be offering that counseling, and it'll be a lot of the same of the ADHD, kind of taking those unique challenges, formulating a plan of what specific things we would like to work on, improve on, track, monitor, all of that good stuff. And it'll look a lot like, what I had described for the previous counseling. And also with the note to those what we would call comorbidities or co-occurring disorders, issues, conditions, things like that. We can factor that into counseling too because we are general social worker, counselor, therapists as well. And we do, know how to kind of interweave all of those things and look at each through the lens of the other as well. So that's a cool thing. And, even if you're not getting treated by NDO, a great thing to remember is that this is the type of framework you should look at for any assessment and counseling situation that you have is they should be invested in how your brain works and giving you an accurate description and diagnosis and details and really learning what the history is that has brought you to the place that you're at now. I think too much as a clinician. I see a real lack of detail in assessment, a lack of commitment to helping someone understand and live with the challenges that they have now identified. And I think, like we're saying, closing gaps, that's another one of the gaps that we want to close is the lack of detailed resources and help and direction forward for ADHD treatment and autism treatment. We as a culture know that we're all kind of experiencing it a little bit, and a lot of us have traits, but I think not a lot of us know some of those specific directions that we get from like a, 5 signs you have ADHD TikTok that we might have seen, where I don't think a doctor has really sat down with me and ever said, hey, this is, what you'll see if you have ADHD, potentially look out for these things, and here's what to do if you see them. I think their job is pretty much just give me the diagnosis, give me the medication, and then send me on my way. And that's a gap. That's a gap to me. So I want to see more thorough, detailed treatment with an understanding of the life experience that someone is having when we sit them down and go through all this stuff with them. So that's really at the heart of what we want to do with NDO, who we want to reach and how we want to reach our community. And, like Heather was saying with those, even just like the waiting gaps, there are big gaps in adult autism assessment availability. I was at an event just the other day where someone told me, based on the insurance they had, there was a 3-year wait in their county. And
Oh, wow.
um, I don't even understand how a system like that works for anyone. We need these ASAP. We need the accommodations. We need the medications. We need these things to live and be functioning, productive members of society and happy, healthy people. And so we are very focused on trying to get people in as soon as possible, trying to streamline this, trying to make this not such a big disruption in your life. And I'm really excited to be part of it. And so far it's going great. And we are really excited to see how as an organization we can, benefit this community that we are actually also a part of. And that is why we are so passionate. And now we want to say a little bit about who we are personally, me, Sammi, and Heather, as neurodivergent people.
So yeah, for me, I've always had anxiety as something I struggled with since I was little, and that kind of was a masking factor for me. I didn't find out until I started doing ADHD assessments that a lot of the symptoms sounded like me. And it wasn't until I got treatment for that anxiety, that high functioning anxiety, that I was kind of able to see these underlying symptoms that were, now I know, ADHD. And so I think that's one of the big things that emphasizes why we do what we do, right? Sometimes things get misdiagnosed, or there's things like high functioning anxiety where, you're performing so well because of fear of failure or perfectionism, or you have super high standards for yourself that, when that's there and that's helpful, you don't see the attention issues. But when you control for some of that anxiety and you've learned your coping skills and you're kind of able to keep that regulation intact, that's when you tend to see a lot of the underlying symptoms that are resurfacing. And then it's kind of having to restart all over. How do I complete this task for work? How do I manage my social life? And it's been frustrating. I'm still kind of working on it, but it's something that I love to be able to see for myself, but also kind of help other people understand that even these things that are occurring don't have to be seen as something that's negative. And there's always a way to kind of help work with it and find things that help manage those symptoms.
Well, lots of good things there to, come from a lived experience with. And for me too, I mean, I don't even know where to start because I don't even remember a time where I didn't feel ADHD. I was diagnosed super early, and it started with that whole gifted thing that most ADHD women and, people in general go through. But yeah, I started out as a gifted kid, but also had a bunch of emotional regulation issues coming out in temper and just big feelings all of the time. And I got through school really well. I had great grades, but my emotions and behaviors were kind of all over the place. And I didn't really have them very well managed until a lot later in life. I mean, I don't know if anybody can relate, but I started really early with medication to the point where they had to put it in my food. And every morning trying to get me to get that medication down was brutal, and I hated life, but it was the only thing that would keep me stable and sitting in my chair in school. And obviously it was a stimulant, so I was just energy regulation all over the place too. But it was brutal. It was brutal in early life and especially in high school and college. So much procrastination, so much, social difficulty, and I had to find my own ways to regulate it. It was a big challenge, but again, great grades, always got compliments, always told I was gifted and skilled, and I certainly did not feel it, but I really put a lot into my work, and I felt like an intelligent person, but I just felt like, how does an intelligent brain work this way? Definitely feels like something's off here. Which I did already know it, but it was just not getting treated the right way. I wasn't getting the right type of treatment and therapy. I wasn't on the right medication. It was just kind of a little bit of a mess until later in life where Same thing was happening in college. I was struggling. I was doing really well in school, but it was always till the last minute and, having to make compromises and having to ask for deadline extensions and being really invested and interested in things, but just not being able to follow through on a lot of things. So I think, all through my life up until that point, I was seeing like such a weird mixed bag of success and failure on a lot of different levels and just kind of riding the line and not really failing so hard that everything fell apart, but still struggling a lot. And I think it was in my later college years and working life where I really got serious about treating my brain with respect, making sure that I was doing the things in life that actually worked to help me facilitate success, and making sure I had the right medications, the right health treatment. And, that's things that are still developing for me. Seeking accommodations at work, seeking out workplaces that really fit the way that I like to work in my brain. And I'm extremely privileged to be working for actually myself as well. I have a solo practice and I work with Neurodivergent Ohio. And both of those allow me the freedom and the style of job that really benefits the way my brain works. And it's the reason I'm a therapist as well. I really love sharing about my experience in the form of help to others that are experiencing the same thing. I think I find so much, secondary community because we're not necessarily in that capacity in therapy, but I think I find a sense of greater community when it comes to working with the neurodivergent client demographic. And I think my experience and also the training that I've received in the area of neurodivergent treatment really helps to give someone a well-rounded therapy experience and help them feel affirmed and validated in what they've gone through. Sometimes it's people that are early on in their diagnosis journey. Sometimes it's people that are later on and have a lot of experience and have just not found what looks effective and successful when it comes to treatment and management. And I think another thing that helps me manage my own self is knowing the truth and affirming that ADHD and autism and neurodivergence is a lifelong issue. It needs lifelong treatment. And I think it's really helpful to, even if you're starting out with therapy, if you don't plan to continue, getting the life skills and the self-management that you need to be successful. And I also recently, again, with kind of the resurgence of autistic discourse on social media, have observed that I also have a lot of autistic traits, that I also have, maybe some of those social difficulties that I've had come from some autistic traits. So that's a journey I'm going on now and exploring too, that I'm very much relating with some of the autistic culture that I've seen from even clients and other people that show me what it looks like to live with different traits of autism. So I feel very close to the people that I treat, and I have a big passion for expanding the reach of education and information, innovating treatment, making sure that people have access to the best treatment possible, making sure that, access means financial access, information access, age access, all of that, and inclusivity as well. I am of the queer community, and I really feel that the big intersection between neurodivergence and the queer community also, deserves a lot of recognition and is a unique perspective to get and receive counseling from. So I think all of those have kind of brought me here into the Neurodivergent Ohio space to where I can really, flourish in all that passion and channel all of my hyperfixation into all of that into something really productive for the community that I care about and get really fulfilling work and make a living off of it, which is super cool. I am, again, very privileged and, also did work very hard to be here, but it's a great place to be. It's a great team to be with. We have a lot of other members that I'm sure you will get to meet soon on our podcast journey here, depending on who would like to participate. But yeah, that is me. That's my experience, and that's why I'm here. And next, we're going to have one of those lovely team members, Allie, who uses they, them pronouns, do one of our first segments. We are going to be debunking a neurodivergent myth.
Hi, I'm Allie Dennis, pronouns they, them. I'm an LST under the supervision of Sherry Bear, LISWS, and today I'm sharing our myth busting section. The myth today is that ADHD and autism are a mental health disorder. That is not true. It's a neurodevelopmental disorder. Sometimes there can be overlap with other mental health disorders, but ADHD and autism are neurodevelopmental disorders and can be diagnosed as early as 2 or 3 years old. Unfortunately, many people experience later diagnoses because there wasn't the appropriate services in place. Some of those appropriate services would be early intervention through well checks with your primary care physician to make sure that the child is having language acquisition, and that's even like formation of language, so use of the mouth properly, and that there's no delays in the motor skills of using words all the way up to social understanding of language. There can also be social delays. Children with autism and ADHD can sometimes show lack of understanding when it comes to what children are trying to communicate to them and how to communicate appropriately back, socially appropriately, at least. So this could look like maybe repeating words that another person has said or repeating phrases, kind of rote phrases of, this is how I introduce myself. Those could be indications that a child has autism or ADHD. There's a lot of overlap there. But the main point is that early intervention is really important, especially in schools, and parents being attuned to their children early on to make sure that they're getting those home visiting programs or getting them into the appropriate services to make that diagnosis early on. And back to you, Sammi and Heather.
And thank you, Allie, for that little bit of information, some really helpful stuff there. We just wanted to remind you that NDO, Neurodivergent Ohio, serves all of Ohio with assessments and counseling, and we do accept all major insurances. Find some more info about that in our description. And as we continue our podcast, we plan to have monthly uploads, potentially more as we go along. And we really want the focus of this podcast to include and center neurodiverse voices in the workplace, in the arts, in our community, in maybe even politics if we get there. We want to center lots of different voices and different experiences and show our community that we are allowed to be loud and proud. We are allowed to seek help. We are allowed to share the help that we have received with others that might find it helpful. This is, an effort to be affirming to the community that we care for. And look out for some guest interviews, some community spotlights, some different segments that we're planning. We have a lot of cool plans with this, and we hope that you will continue listening and find some benefit and some help here. And if you would like to connect with us, all of our socials are going to be in our little description as well. We are at Neurodivergent Ohio on pretty much all platforms: Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. I think that's it. And that is about all we got for you today, guys. So thank you so much for joining us. I am Sammi.
And I'm Heather.
And this has been The Art of Divergence. You guys have a great day.